1 minute ago, the unimaginable became reality. A secret kept deep beneath the palace walls is now public, and it's more catastrophic than anyone could have anticipated. Sworn to keep quiet, royal doctors have violated protocol in the most disastrous way imaginable. The Princess of Wales's medical records have come to light, and they present a terrifying image for which nobody was ready. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. An encrypted file titled Confidential Windsor appeared in the inboxes of all major European newsrooms just after midnight. The timing was no accident. The contents? Even worse than predicted. A detailed medical history of Catherine, Princess of Wales. Blood work, psychological evaluations, surgical notes, all properly time-stamped and cross-signed by palace physicians. The file originated from an unidentified whistleblower, and what it contained shook everything the public thought they knew. Inside those records was a word, bold, red, and circled. Ayrshire. Next to it, a scrawled note. Not for public disclosure. Refile under codename Orchid. This wasn't merely a diagnosis, it was a buried truth, a truth someone wished obliterated. The leak clocked precisely at 12:01 a.m. appeared planned, strategic, as if someone within the palace had waited for the perfect moment to unleash a royal bombshell. Shockwaves spread across newsrooms. Headlines exploded within minutes. Catherine's concealed ailment exposed. Royal cover-up? A palace protocol violation causes a crisis? And behind closed doors, Kensington Palace plunged into turmoil. Phones rang unanswered. Doors banged. Senior aides vanished from public view. There were rumors of emergency meetings taking place deep within the palace's most restricted passageways and of a complete lockdown. But among the fear, one question yelled louder than the others. Why now? Why is this being released now? Some assumed it was vengeance, a final stroke by someone who'd been hushed too long. Others speculated a royal defection, a member of the inner circle fighting back against the institution's iron grasp. However, one aspect of the study put a cloud over everything as suspicion circulated. A diagnosis removed months ago from all public-facing paperwork had emerged this time, completely annotated. It spoke of a deteriorating disease, one that, if discovered sooner, may have been controlled, one that might have been overlooked purposefully. Catherine's unexplained retreat from royal duties no longer looked like rest. It looked like retreat, or worse, containment. Detention within the palace walls was now about survival rather than damage management. Every advisor, every physician, every assistant now feared exposure. Because this wasn't simply an act of treachery, it was a confession. And it had come from inside. But this wasn't just a medical report, it was a message. And that wasn't the first time the palace sought to suppress Catherine's truth. When Catherine retreated from public life, the palace provided rehearsed words and hazy reassurances, but beneath the stoic pronouncements and carefully planned photo sessions, something far darker was unfolding. A health catastrophe they never wanted the world to see. Her absence was not startling, it was systematic. First, a canceled appearance due to weariness, then, a foreign tour postponed in the interest of rehabilitation. And lastly, complete quiet. No fresh images, no engagements, not even the briefest glance from a car window. Royal watchers, generally skilled at decoding the subtlest of clues, were left in the dark, but someone inside was keeping track. A private letter that was eventually disclosed to the media detailed the exact dates of her withdrawal, with frightening accuracy. Each absence corresponded with a significant time, either in the monarchy's calendar or in Catherine's declining condition. Yet even the best-crafted lies tend to disintegrate under pressure. Statements from court aides began to contradict one another. One stated she was healing at home with her children. Another, days later, insisted she was abroad at a private institution, and still no proof, no corroboration, just hazy promises of a comeback, always soon, always when ready. Suspicion was sparked by the contradictions, and suspicion, once seated, became wildfire. Then came the murmurs, whispers from within the palace staff. One person recounted hearing Catherine crying at night, muffled cries, reverberating around the West Wing. Another claimed a dispute between senior aides. Voices yelled, doors banged, security tightened. One horrifying account said she was sedated under monitoring. Whether true or not, the rumors gained traction rapidly, fueled by a digital youth yearning for answers. But the most striking indicator of unhappiness came from the inside. Huge staff resignations from Catherine's household. Valets, private secretaries, even her most devoted helper of 10 years abruptly vanished without notice. In royal circles, such transfers rarely happen without a storm behind the scenes. Something was unraveling, and fast. Then one fuzzy photograph, taken from a distance, potentially without consent. It showed Catherine stepping into a waiting vehicle. Slender, pale, a shell of the brilliant king the world once revered. The photo was deleted from official news sites within hours, but not before it spread like wildfire online. That quick picture created more concerns than it answered and hardened public belief that the palace was hiding something dreadful. Inside the family, the problem deepened. William, previously totally aligned with Paula's approach, began pushing back. He desired honesty. They desired authority. Sources close to the couple alleged stress broke over in meetings, with William reportedly storming out, refusing to follow media scripts. The heir to the throne was no longer in harmony with the firm, and it showed. However, others were subtly making the connections while the world was preoccupied with her disappearance. Inside those medical records lied a royal scandal, generations in the making. The released files are more than just a diagnosis. They are a scathing indictment of royal neglect, generational trauma, and perhaps something far more organized. A silent conflict being fought from within the princess's own bloodstream. At first sight, the documents appear clinical columns of test results, blood tests, medical comments, but as experts began to study them, an undeniable pattern developed. Genetic markers, incredibly uncommon inherited disorders that subtly impact the immune and brain systems, were hidden among the technical terms. These weren't simply abnormalities, they were red flags. Even worse, they were recognized years ago, then buried. Catherine's records show that early symptoms, excessive exhaustion, weight fluctuation, and autoimmune abnormalities had been noted as far back as a decade. However, no intervention followed. Instead, the symptoms were routinely disregarded as stress, overwork, or even hormonal fluctuations. But the newly released papers indicate that deeper scans, blood tests, and consultations did occur. Not only did the palace know, but they deliberately opted to remain silent. And that quiet, according to the records, may have cost her precious time. The doctor's remarks in the margins, small handwritten cautions like "seek outside," "consult denied," and "symptom pattern matches ORCID code," are even more unsettling. That identical code, ORCID, had shown in the prior leak. Experts believe suggest it was a veiled reference to containing high-risk royal conditions discreetly, a system not built for healing, but for control. Her reproductive history is also recorded in the files, and it's terrible to read. Unusual immune suppression, heightened neurological sensitivity, and repeated problems are all mentioned. These aren't just footnotes. They depict the story of a lady pressured to preserve public appearances, pregnancies, and perfection, while her body was slowly breaking down. The date of her most recent known public appearance and a report marked "Do Not Escalate" have now raised concerns. And then there's the most unsettling element, Catherine's neurological examinations, notes on stress responses, cognitive fluctuation, and recurring migraines, all documented but never revealed. Not to the public, not to the press, and maybe not even to her. The pattern shows not simply delayed care, but refused care. Was this the outcome of institutional fear or something even colder? It is now impossible to ignore the similarities. The press has begun evoking Diana's name, again not out of sympathy, but out of pattern recognition. Diana's medical struggles, abuse, and mental health cover-ups were formerly disregarded. Now history seems to be repeating itself, only this time, much more meticulously. As public trust weakens, a new player steps forward, one who believes this isn't just about Catherine, it's about the crown itself. He speaks with a masked voice, under threat of exile. A senior member of the royal medical team violates his oath for redemption rather than retaliation. They knew. He says, and they let it happen. They call him Ashbrid, though that isn't his true name. His face remains covered, voice distorted by computer filters, yet his words cut with clinical precision. He claims to have worked closely within the medical wing dedicated to the royal family, specifically appointed to manage long-term wellness strategies for senior royals. And according to him, everything we've seen so far, the stillness, the confusion, the omissions, wasn't a mistake. It was the outcome of careful preparation that was approved at the highest levels. Ashbridge alleges the palace issued direct orders to edit Catherine's records, not redact, alter. In one astonishing accusation, he recalls a whole set of diagnostic notes being changed to reduce neurological symptoms. The scans that initially raised warnings, he says, were sealed and subsequently destroyed. Palace legal counsel made it clear, he recounts, these conclusions would never see daylight. We were told to defend the crown, not the patient. He cites something known internally as Operation Orchid, the identical code name that appears constantly in Catherine's files. According to Ashbridge, this operation was a long-standing policy to control and conceal any medical vulnerability that could jeopardize the monarchy's image. He characterizes Orchid as more of a firewall than a protocol. If someone within the royal circle exhibited a condition regarded too unstable, ORCID was triggered. The goal wasn't treatment, it was narrative control. Perhaps most disturbing is his accusation that Catherine realized something wasn't right. She asked, many than once, to visit external physician specialists outside the firm. She requested answers, Ashbridge recalls, and they warned her it would damage the family. She was denied the right to her own body's truth. When challenged on why he came forward, Ashbridge doesn't hesitate, because if this goes farther, she's not the only one at risk. He worries that Catherine's case may merely be the beginning. Those other royals may have undergone similar containment, and that the system in place isn't built to cure, but to suppress. We're not looking at a failure, he says. We're staring at a machine functioning just as it was built, cores. These revelations fuel a deadly new narrative. No longer merely a personal tragedy. Catherine's tragedy is now portrayed as part of a bigger institutional design, one that may have cost more than a life. It may have cost the public their trust. But if Catherine's life was in jeopardy, who stood to gain from keeping her sick and silent? The crown relies on image, but within its glittering halls, power conflicts rage. Catherine's situation became more than a personal concern. It became a weapon in a quiet, vicious fight between heirs, handlers, and covert foes. From the time whispers of her illness entered the inner sanctuary of power, decisions were no longer about care, they were about control. Prince William, famed for his serenity and discipline, reportedly wanted transparency. He believed the public had a right to know what was happening to their future queen. But Charles disagreed. The king, now coping with his own health concerns, urged the topic be limited. According to palace insiders, a fierce argument between father and son took place behind closed doors, one that ended with a terrifying ultimatum. Silence protects the throne. Camilla's influence, as usual, lingered in the background. Those close to the matter allege she advised Charles against any type of disclosure. The royalty cannot bleed in public, she allegedly said. Not once again. Her statements echoed the method once utilized during Diana's worst days. Manage the optics, disguise the fissures. But this time the stakes were different. The palace wasn't only harboring illness, it was suppressing the very individual who posed a threat to their carefully created picture of stability. According to reports, Princess Anne, who was renowned for her steel and bluntness, adopted a completely different strategy. In a rare show of rebellion, she pulled William away and murmured things that now bear a terrifying weight. Your mother was the victim of their actions. They'll do it again. Those statements, insiders claim, destroyed the last of William's patience. From that moment forward, he ceased following protocol. He began doubting everything. Meanwhile, security around Catherine intensified, but not in the way one would expect. Guards were installed. Access lists were narrowed. Rooms were restricted even to longtime helpers. This wasn't protection. It was confinement. Those inside her circle were quietly terminated or reassigned. Even her relatives, especially her brothers and parents, were now held at arm's length. Phone calls went unanswered. Visits were canceled. It was as though Catherine had become state property, untouchable, invisible, and fully controlled. Then came the most incriminating suggestion of all, that her medical data weren't just concealed, they were weaponized. Sources close to the probe claim that records modified, obscured, and coded may have been used to influence internal succession debates. If Catherine were ruled unfit to serve, what would that mean for William's role? For the public's trust? For the Crown's long-term strategy? The implications are explosive, because if true, it would mean her grief was exploited, not ignored, not discarded, but intentionally used to change royal power. This wasn't merely a medical mystery anymore. Catherine had been turned into a pawn in a political chessboard game that she had never consented to participate. Yet even with her infirmity, Catherine wasn't passive. According to new intel, she made movements no one expected. They sought to shatter her, quiet her, and keep her in the shadows. But Catherine, knowing she had little time and even fewer allies, left behind a strategy, a digital trace, a final royal insurrection. While the palace created barriers around her and covered the truth, Catherine was chronicling everything. Hidden in a small wooden keepsake box, tucked away below layers of personal possessions, was an encrypted USB disk. Found only after her absence became a national mystery, it was a flash of defiance in a system determined to erase her voice. And inside that, clear evidence that Catherine had been planning for this fallout long before anyone understood. The files were well organized, categorized by date and sentiment. Among them were handwritten letters addressed to her children, to William, and perhaps most startlingly, to Queen Elizabeth herself, written before, to the death of the monarch. The letter to the Queen was an appeal, not for aid, but for comprehension. In it, Catherine wrote, "They will utilize my image, but I will not be their fiction." The message was plain. She knew what was coming. She was aware of the system's ability to conceal her suffering while rewriting, reframing, and reducing her to a smiling image of power. It was more than simply letters, though. The USB held a series of video diaries, intimate, raw, and entirely unfiltered. In them, Catherine looked not as the poised princess the world knew, but as a woman coping with betrayal, dread, and isolation. She spoke directly to the camera, detailing conversations with palace doctors, sharing her suspicions, and expressing sadness over being cut off from her own truth. Her words were stinging. "If I disappear," she stated in one tape, "it wasn't a decision, it was choreography." More than occasions, She emphasized her growing anxiety of being used as a symbol, not appreciated as a human. These words reverberate throughout the royal machine, an organization founded on tradition, responsibility, and quiet. But Catherine was determined to break that silence. In-depth meeting notes, transcripts of private talks, and even leaked medical records that deviate from official records are all included in her files. Names appear, some coded, some shockingly direct. Aides, medics, senior royals, accomplices of a system that, she believed, let her suffer for the sake of protecting fiction above reality. Scrawled in the corner of one page, "They want the crown clean, even if it means blood on their hands," is arguably the most eerie entry in her record. These weren't the thoughts of a woman unraveling. They were the words of someone methodically establishing her own archive, her legacy, in her own voice. Catherine's reply wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was forceful. In a world that tried to destroy her autonomy, she restored it digitally, emotionally, and irreversibly. But what happens when those files are identified and found to match the handwriting of a lady who was pronounced too sick to write? The heir to the king has always donned a controlled mask. But what he discovered in Catherine's medical records blew that facade into shreds. William is no longer the loyal son, he's a man on a mission, and revenge may wear a crown. Sources claim the transformation in William was immediate. The moment he accessed Catherine's full, uncensored medical file, the one concealed from both the public and him, he raged. Behind closed doors, what had been handled with cool diplomacy and measured remarks fell apart. In a private conference with senior palace advisors, William allegedly lost control. Voices were raised, doors banged shut. White-faced, one advisor left and refused to come back. According to leaks from an aide who later quit, the future king shouted the words no one ever expected to hear: "You let her decay." That same staffer, previously among William's most trusted, tendered their resignation days later. Their departure followed the revelation of an audio tape, brief but devastating, reportedly capturing William mid-confrontation. His voice, raw with grief and hatred, reflected the indignation of a man betrayed not just as a husband, but as a royal who'd been kept in the dark. He was furious over the institution's inaction in the recording, calling the quiet around Catherine illegal and accusing the crown of choosing tradition over life. From that moment, William shifted strategy. He began bypassing palace-approved doctors, resorting instead to overseas experts, flying in specialists under non-disclosure agreements, meeting them privately, and refusing to brief his father's team. He allegedly said, "If the palace won't save her, I will." A cold war between father and son began as a result of that disobedience. 1. No news release could fix. Rumors soon began to arise of a so-called black file, a private dossier William was reported to be developing, recording every choice, every denial, every name involved to the suppression of Catherine's treatment. The file apparently includes internal emails, timelines, medical notes, and testimony from insiders who now fear punishment. And it's not simply for reference. Word is William intends to utilize it, but that wasn't all. In a gesture of silent disobedience, he began disregarding procedure, declining ceremonial appearances, skipping briefings, canceling commitments without explanation. Behind each missed event was a message he would no longer play the polished heir, while the lady he loved was being written out by the exact institution designed to protect her. Panic spread throughout the monarchy. William wasn't just upset, he was taking control. And for the first time in decades, the image of a united royal front began to shatter. And as William prepares to risk everything, the monarchy itself begins to crack under pressure from a force more powerful than lineage: public opinion. The British population has traditionally revered the royals, but this time, something has changed. Catherine was theirs, graceful, grounded, and quietly heroic. As the truth gets out, fury evolves into action. The crown is no longer impervious to attack. First there was silence, then mistrust, and now the storm. Thousands gathered outside Buckingham Palace with candles, placards, and one terrifying chant. "Catherine, where are you?" As protests stretched across cities and digital borders, the facade of calm broke. Kensington became a stronghold, but the barricades couldn't hold back a movement. This was anger, not interest. The public wanted answers, not platitudes. They demanded justice, not spin. Social media lit the spark. Within hours, hashtags like #NumberJustice, #JusticeForKate, #NoCrownExposed, and #NoLetHerSpeak topped global trends. Millions shared recordings from Catherine's secret video diaries, weeping with the rawness of a voice they were never intended to hear. A voice that exposed the price of quiet and broke through the facade of royalty. Overnight, public perception split. The image of the polished, cohesive royal family broke. In its place stood a far more painful truth. Even among die-hard royalists, uncertainty began to develop. Prominent voices that had previously supported the monarchy retreated in uncertainty. Some defended the institution, claiming duty and tradition, but others, lifelong admirers, deserted, questioning how a woman so cherished could be disguised, controlled, and nearly obliterated. The crown, once a symbol of fortitude, now seemed weak, seemingly frantic to maintain power, as its foundation shattered beneath it. It wasn't simply the public. Politicians, celebrities, and religious began to speak out. A previous prime minister termed the discoveries morally repulsive. An impartial review was required by a prominent archbishop. Human rights organizations released statements demanding for transparency and accountability. The pressure was undeniable. Parliament, once reluctant to cross the regal threshold, was pushed to act. An official examination was undertaken into medical ethics within the royal family, and if members of the firm had interfered with care, autonomy, or the right to choose. This wasn't simply a controversy, it was a reckoning. Once unified by ritual and show, the country was now divided, with some calling for change and others preserving history. And in the middle of it all was Catherine. Not just a princess, but a symbol of what happens when loyalty becomes complicity and tradition becomes tyranny. But while the world demands answers, one final twist emerges, one last truth lurking in the shadows of Catherine's diagnosis. Buried deep in the final pages of the stolen file was a single phrase, redacted in black ink. When restored digitally, it spelled something that didn't belong in a medical record at all. It wasn't a diagnosis, it was a name. Forensic experts studying the information revealed what many originally disregarded as a faulty file entry. But when enhanced and decoded, the phrase became evident: Alcyone. Not a medical word, not a physician's note, but something far more obscure. The term, rooted in ancient Greek mythology, is related to metamorphosis, tragedy, and cosmic destiny. It's also said to be a confidential codename previously used in rare royal lineage files tied exclusively to those deemed as symbolically vital to the monarchy's continuance. This statement stirred up a frenzy of conjecture. Some believe Catherine had been designated long before her marriage, as part of a prophetic internal plot to update the royal image. Others claim Alcyone was not a designation of honor, but of sacrifice, that she was chosen not for protection, but to absorb the institution's grief and pay the price for its preservation. One analyst reading the material described the file as oddly choreographed, as if Catherine's rise and final stillness was written long before her own voice could mold it. But there was something much more disturbing. Weeks before the leak, sharp-eyed watchers saw William wearing a new necklace beneath his collar during a royal walkabout. It had a single etching, Alcyone. At the time, it was dismissed as ornamental. Now it's considered as a sign of reckoning. Was William showing defiance or mourning? Had he found the term before everyone else, or was it Catherine who left it for him to find? And then, her voice, one final time. In a last video discovered from the USB, Catherine sits silently, holding a letter she never mails. Her sentences are calm, careful. If you see this, it indicates I wasn't intended to survive. It's not a confession. It's a warning. One meant to survive her. One aimed to torment those who turned away. Her voice cracks, at the end, not in fear, but in resolution. She knew the storm was coming, and in her own way, she became the lightning that sparked it. The world now has to wonder if Catherine's downfall signaled the end of the monarchy or the start of a reckoning from which no royal can avoid. Thanks for viewing. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.